All right, this video is going to take us through the causes of World War II. So why World War II started. And so these are really going to be the three main causes. We're going to get to two of them in this video, and then the next one we'll talk about the failure of appeasement, which really can kind of get wrapped into this one. All right, so quick recap of the current historical situation. The world's on fire. All right, we talked about the Great Depression is creating all sorts of chaos, all sorts of problems, and then we ended with a bunch of dictators coming into power. All right, so to recap, one of the first causes that we're going to talk about is the Treaty of Versailles. You're like, oh, great. Here we go again, talking about the Treaty of Versailles. Well, all these countries that we're going to end up fighting in World War II, they all have a problem with the Treaty of Versailles. I don't want to go into Germany again, but you guys know. I mean, if you haven't figured this out by now, I'm worried because we've talked about it for 3 straight units now. The Germans had, obviously, they got hammered by the treaty. All right, so the Germans are going to get shrunken borders, no counties, reparations. That's in all caps because that's the big one. Full blame for the war. You get it. Hopefully you get it by now. Germany didn't like it. All right, so what's Japan's beef with the Treaty of Versailles? Well, they received some territory, but not all they wanted. All right, so that was a big thing. And that's going to be, not everybody's going to be super happy about the treaty. But more importantly, they're disrespected. They're very much viewed at the treaty as second-class citizens. Like, oh, that's cute, Japan. You sit over there at the kids' table. Let the adults talk. They are not viewed as equal as the United States, France, and Britain. They are not viewed as their equal. They even tried to implement a request for like a racial equality clause in the treaty, and that got rejected. And it's important to know and just remember at the time, like there's still a lot of racism that exists, not just in our, world, in our country. We still have segregation in our country. I mean, there's a lot of racial beliefs at the time that white people, that white Europeans they're superior, and so the Japanese just want to be treated as equal, but these world leaders and others, they don't view them that way. They don't view them as equal, and it's hard to imagine that, but that world leaders would have that opinion. But at the time, that's just how they viewed the Japanese. That the Japanese just were not the same. So they were going to go out, and the Japanese are like, all right, fine. You don't want to respect us. We'll show you that we're someone that's going to be respected. All right. So what about Italy? So Japan gets disrespected. Italy joined the war on the Allied side. If you guys remember, they got a little map up here. Italy was on the German and Austro-Hungarian Empire side. All right. But they ended up joining and flipping sides to join Britain, France, and Russia. Because they said, hey, you'll get a bunch of this territory. You'll get a bunch of Austro-Hungarian territory if you join our side. And that was called the Treaty of London. All right, so here's the territory that Italy thought that they were going to get from the treaty. All right, so they're like, all right, cool, it works out. We won. We joined the right side. We won. Let's go to Versailles. Let's get what's promised to us. Nope. All right, so they're all excited thinking, hey, everything's going to go well, but they were largely ignored at the Versailles meeting. Britain and France were actually annoyed by them. They thought that they performed poorly during the war. They made a promise that they'd get this land, but they just didn't feel like they pulled their end of the bargain. America also didn't want to give them that land because they wanted to have other nationalities like the Slavic people. They wanted them to have territory of Yugoslavia. They wanted these other nationalities to get territory that they felt they deserved from Austro-Hungarian Empire breaking up, because there were so many different nationalities in that they wanted to make sure that these different nationalities, the Poles, the Czechs, the Slovaks, all these people got their own country. And so giving more land to Italy didn't seem fair from the Americans' point of view. So they're only going to get a small portion of what they thought. And that's going to enrage the Italians. All right, so they're going to be upset because they're going to feel like we went into debt for this war. We suffered, we won, we did all these things, and we don't get anything that was promised to us. So that's going to create a lot of Italian nationalism that's going to be the reason why Mussolini's going to come into power. So in summary, Germany, we talked about, they got hammered by the treaty. Japan, they got disrespected. And Italy got gypped. All right, and so these 3 countries, really, they got issues with the Treaty of Versailles. And it's going to put them on a path to where these dictators are going to start to rise into power. And it's going to put them on a path to have problems. So everyone's mad. Now what? Well, let's start taking over a bunch of stuff. The Axis powers are going to start to expand their territory. All right, so what we have right now is the world is really divided. We have democratic countries who have a black eye because of the Depression. A lot of people think democracy, capitalism is not working. All right, that's Britain, France, U.S. We have fascist dictators that have risen into power. We talked about this with Italy, Germany in the last unit. Spain is going to become one. Spain is going to become one. Nationalistic Japan. They're not exactly fascist, but they are militaristic. They do want to expand their borders, much like the fascists do. And then we have communist dictatorships that have arisen. All right, and that's in the Soviet Union. All right, so we have a world that is divided. We got a bunch of dictators and militarists in power. All right, and so there's too many dictators in charge for something crazy not to happen. All right, so it's about to go down. Axis powers expand their borders and the League of Nations failures. This is really the second cause for why. All right, so wait a minute, just to recap. What are the Axis powers again? We'll go over that in a second, but that's Germany, Italy, and Japan. What's the League of Nations again? Again, the League of Nations, that was created actually as part of the Treaty of Versailles, so really it's kind of getting lumped in. But they're an international peacekeeping organization to help prevent another war from breaking out, and obviously it's going to fail. Mussolini kicks off the violence with his invasion of Ethiopia. Britain and France condemn the act. However, the League's just inefficient. They really can't agree on how to punish them. They essentially get a slap on the wrist. The leader of Ethiopia goes to them and says, hey, help us. We just got invaded. You need to send a message. You need to help us fight off Italy. And Britain and France are like, yeah, we'll do something. We'll stop trading stuff with them. It's like, yeah, but they're just going to steal our stuff. They're like, yeah, that's a good point. Well, Britain really doesn't have that much interest. They want to make sure that their Egypt and the Sudan is protected, the Suez Canal. They don't really care that much about Ethiopia. And remember, Ethiopia was free. The only country that defeated an invading army was in Africa was Ethiopia. They defeated the Italians. So this is also a sense of Italian pride to go in. So they wanted to have access to those areas for the resources. They wanted to kind of complete their little, that's all Italian territory. They wanted to kind of complete their East African area there. The Italians did. But they didn't, nothing really happened to them as a result of Italy invading them. All right, and so he's going to basically join sides with Hitler. All right, and then they already had kind of a friendship brewing anyway. But as a result of all this international backlash, he is going to call for the Rome-Berlin Axis. All right, this is why they're called the Axis powers. All right, it's going to be an agreement, a military treaty that they're going to sign. It'll eventually become the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo, which is in Japan, Axis. All right, so once again, that's why they're called the Axis powers. And they are also, there's other chaos that's brewing because they're helping prop up a dictatorship in Spain as well. But Japan is also very busy building their path to war. They basically are going to attack an area called Manchuria, because there was a Mukden incident where basically the Japanese tried to blow up their own railway and accused the Chinese of doing it. So it was like hey, they tried to blow up our stuff, but they didn't use enough explosive. It didn't even really do any damage. But the Japanese were trying to make some kind of a reason to invade and take over that area. And so they invade China over this failed attempt at themselves to blow up a railway and blame the Chinese. And so when the League of Nations goes in and they get China asks them to look into it, the League of Nations goes and they find out it's an illegitimate reason to invade. And so they say, hey, you can't do that. You need to stop. You need to get out of China. And this took over a year. So after they've already occupied the area, the League of Nations goes in and says, don't do that. So Japan says, sorry, here's the territory back. No, I'm just kidding. That didn't happen. They just said, who do you think you are to tell us what to do? You think you're better than us? Peace, we're out of here. And they leave the League of Nations. And so really the Axis powers expanding their territory and the failure of the League of Nations is a huge reason for the war. Because one, why did the League of Nations fail? Not all countries joined. Germany was left out initially, Russia with the communism, and the United States didn't join because they didn't want to get pulled into a European conflict. Some countries left early. Japan, Germany. Wait, I thought they didn't join. Germany's going to join I think in the mid to late 20s they'll join, but then Hitler's going to take them right back out of it again. So you got countries kind of coming and going as they please. They can't really, whenever an act of aggression took place, they couldn't really do anything about it. They didn't have an army, they didn't have any real power, and they couldn't act quickly. It would take, potentially a year to, months to years after an invasion took place to get anything even organized to punish a country. And by then it really didn't matter. All right, no real power, sanctions. Most people, no, you can't trade with them. Well, it's like, well, they could still trade with America, who's not in, or other countries could still trade with them. But basically, this failure is going to encourage other dictators, especially Hitler, which we'll talk about in the next video. They're going to start to take over more and more territory because they realize that the League of Nations, when one country invades another country, the League will sit there and they'll say, don't do that. We're going to not trade with you. We're going to do all these things. But really, in the end, nothing is going to happen. And so that's going to cause for more and more and more territory to be taken, to where eventually gets a point where these world leaders, they can't just sit by and let all these countries be taken over. Action is going to have to take place, and eventually a war will break out. So instead of stopping these small scale incidences, the League of Nations does nothing, lets these areas take over. They try to stop it, but really there's nothing they can do, and eventually we're on the path to war.